It's amazing where people thought our technology would be in 1968 compared to where it really is. In 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was written in 1968, Arthur C. Clarke describes an iPad-like object called a newspad, on which you can receive newspapers and magazines. And this is basically one function of an iPad. However, some things are very far off, such as the fact that they reached Mars and you could just take a quick flight to get there, and you could charter a flight to Mars and an average person would be able to pay for it. 2001: Space Odyssey was definitely the most interesting book I read. At the very beginning of the book, it follows a group of simple ancient man-apes as they are trained by a metallic extraterrestrial monolith to evolve into humans through the use of tools and weapons. As time went on, the man-ape's brains evolved and grew into modern humans' brains. My favorite quote from the whole book was, "His brain grew. He invented language and organized it into civilization. And he invented weapons, first knives, but then guns, and finally nuclear missiles. Such innovations had been essential in man's dominion over Earth, but as long as they existed, he was living on borrowed time." I love this quote so much because how relative it is to humans right now, with the North Koreans threatening to bomb us and things like that, where that would destroy a bunch of humans. This book is split into a few parts, but now they jump into follow a story of Dr. Heywood Floyd as he is about to embark on a journey to the moon after having a meeting with the president. Once he arrives, he is greeted by a high-ranking moon officer of sorts, and is whisked straight off to a meeting with a lead scientist who explains that they had found a magnetic disturbance in Tycho, one of the moon's craters. A search of the crater had revealed a large black slab called TMA-1. When they uncover the giant black slab and sunlight hits upon it for the first time in 3 million years, it sends forth a piercing sound and a strong wave of sound signal to the far reaches of the universe. This is the end of Dr. Floyd's story, but now we jump to the story of David Bowman and Frank Poole, as they are the only conscious human beings aboard the Discovery space mission to Saturn. 3 of their colleagues were hibernating and not to be woken until he got to Saturn. The only intelligent things on the ship that were still awake were the 2 men and their computer, Hal. While they were on the ship, Hal relays some information to them that a communication system to Earth is set to fail. And when the same thing happens with the replacement part, Poole goes to investigate and is killed by Hal. Hal smashes a transport pod into him while Poole is floating in space. I know, right? After Hal and Bowman have a long argument, Hal agrees to give Bowman manual control of the other astronauts' hibernation. Just before he can awaken the other astronauts, Hal opens the airlocks in an attempt on Bowman's life. He disconnects Hal and reestablishes contact with Earth, and only then does he realize that the true purpose of the mission is to investigate the civilization that left behind the TMA-1 on the moon. Bowman realizes that Hal was acting in self-defense, and he reconnects him. Bowman spends months alone on the ship, when he nears Earth, he notices a large black spot on the moon, and it turns out to be a larger version of TMA-1. He investigates the large black spot in the transport pod, and he gets sucked into it, and he enters an infinite cycle of entering the Stargate, as it's called, which is just really a larger version of TMA-1. He eventually subconsciously creates a hotel suite, and when he falls asleep, he becomes an eternal being with no body, and he saves the world from a deadly nuclear war by exploding a nuclear missile mid-air. As you can see, Arthur C. Clarke is a futurist, and though he was born in 1917, the things he thought about and wrote about were much more like the things that existed when he died in 2008. In his book, he also talks about the idea of extraterrestrial beings, and also gives many opinions and some facts about why they most likely exist. Though he doesn't have this included in his list of careers, he should add in philosopher, because he has great ideas about the start of life as we know it. To be honest, he is probably the most interesting man I have ever heard of. He was appointed as a knight by the Queen herself in 1998, and he was also awarded Sri Lanka's highest civil honor, Sri Lanka Bhimyana, in 2005. And the main reason he was in Sri Lanka in the first place was to pursue his avid interest in scuba diving. His love of being underwater was kindled by the fact that he discovered the ancient underwater ruins of the Karnaswaram Temple in Tirunelveli. In addition to this, In the 80s, he hosted a couple of TV shows, and some of them were even named after him because he was just so interesting. The reason I know of him, though, is because of his fame as a sci-fi writer. As both an avid popularizer of space travel and a futurist of uncanny ability, he won a Kalinga Prize for popularizing science. These achievements earned him the title of being the prophet of the space age and also one of the big three of sci-fi. Even before his stunning writing career, he was a brilliant inventor. As a teenager, he joined the British Interplanetary Society and helped develop the technology for satellite communications. After seeing all of these amazing things that he had done with his life by understanding how computers work and how to have them work for him, I got kind of jealous and I wanted to learn how to do these things for myself. iOS Development Bibliography is a book that goes over the basics of how to program on a couple of certain Apple products. But this book is mostly just a collection of ads for other books within it, and it summarizes the other books. So that's where most of the knowledge out of that book came from. So it was not a very good book to read, and it did not contribute to my genre project in many different ways, because it would have been better just to read one of the other books that it had an ad in for. For obvious reasons, this book had no characters and no action. This book was written by the software development team at iOS. Computer Programming for Dummies was the third book that I read. This went over the basics of programming in many different programming languages, such as C++, JavaScript, BASIC, Liberty Basic, and also many, many others. The best thing about this book, though, was definitely the fact that it had multiple in-depth chapters about JavaScript programming. And the reason that this is so wonderful is that JavaScript is my personal computer programming language of choice. And they only did this for JavaScript, so it was very lucky, so I didn't have to sit through a bunch of different chapters about C++ when I can't even program in that language. Throughout this book, there are many little short stories and poems to help you remember different parts of the programming languages. So this made it slightly more interesting. So it was way better than the iOS development bibliography, but it didn't even come close to how good 2001: A Space Odyssey was. It also had some illustrations to elaborate upon certain subjects and give a quick idea of how to use them, such as a road splitting for an if-then statement, or it showed you how to use variables, such as variables in math, to make variable statements. That makes sense, right? In other chapters, there were exercises and instructions to try some things on your own. This book was written by another interesting man named Wallace Wang. Wallace Wang seems like a pretty funny guy, considering that he calls himself the Rebellious Agent on his website. He runs his own website, as I said before, with advice, quotes, jokes, book recommendations, and also, of course, an autobiography about himself. As it says on his website, he graduated from Michigan State University with a bachelor's degree of science in material science, and he also minored in English. After his graduation, he moved to San Diego, and he got a job working for General Dynamics. This is a defense contracting company for the United States government. After some time working there, he moved to another defense contractor called Cubic Corporation. This is another defense company that also works for the government. Here, he worked as a systems engineer. After 2 years there, he quit and began writing computer manuals because the current ones were so confusing and not the average human could understand them. Because they were so confusing, and also they used a bunch of high-tech, fancy computer programming mumbo-jumbo. And then, writing the computer manual showed him the gateway to becoming the author that I know him as. He wrote many different books, and he still loves reading books, as that's one of the things that it says in his autobiography. Finally, out of sheer curiosity mixed with boredom, he became a stand-up comic. But after he started doing very well and realized how dead-on being a comic was, he quit and went back to writing, and that is where he currently is in his life today. Reading these books was definitely worth it, because now I understand many things about computers that I didn't know before. This genre is very new, and no one is really considered the father or mother of this genre. Because of the relative newness of the genre, there isn't much online information about it. But on the other hand, the few authors that there are pretty interesting. I mean, look at Arthur C. Clarke, Sir Arthur C. Clarke, I'm sorry, and Wallace Wang, the comedian, the rebellious agent. And though Wallace Wang attempts to make these books as interesting as he can and funny and try and make it a lot more of an easier read, no one would really fall in love with one of these books or find it hard to put down. So, in any of these books in this genre, not just his, so to speak. But if you can just try to power through one of them, it is definitely worth it due to all of the knowledge that you can get. Thank you.